Alrighty, welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for clicking on today's video. Today, I am actually really excited to bring this video to you. So we're actually going to be going over this video right here that's from a relatively small YouTuber, so Darius.r.t. I will link the channel in the description. But this is the title of the video. It's how to stop binge eating as a former fat kid. And I watched this video and I thought that it was pretty good. There are things that I agree with, things that I wouldn't say I disagree with, but maybe I wouldn't say the exact same way. But I always really enjoy being able to share someone's channel that's not very big and, you know, just kind of see what they have to say. And so that's what we're going to be doing today. So how to stop binge eating as a former fat kid. Let's go.
If you know what binge eating is, then you know what the cure is. And if you don't know what binge eating is, well, basically, binge eating is a complex eating disorder that is characterized by uncontrollable overeating. It's not just enjoying a big meal, it's consuming excessive amounts of food in a short amount of time, often when not even hungry.
Yeah, I think that one of the biggest things, as someone that has struggled with it, is like, it's less so about, I mean, it's definitely not about being hungry, but I feel like for me, the biggest thing was feeling out of control and feeling like I couldn't really do anything about it. It felt like I was in a trance state when I would struggle with it a lot.
Our brains release dopamine when we eat, making us feel good. But in binge eating, this reward system goes haywire, leading to a vicious cycle. Emotional triggers, such as stress or boredom, can often set off a binge episode. And after a binge, guilt and shame take over, worsening the emotional turmoil. And the cure is pretty obvious, right? It's just subscribe.
But it is funny, like people that really don't understand having this type of disorder, they just think it's that simple, right? It's like the same kind of people that will say, oh, fat people just need to stop eating, right? It's like, technically, yes, you're right. Like that would solve the issue. But the thing is that it's not that easy. Like you can't just stop eating. And with binging, there's so much of a cycle. Like he kind of mentioned it earlier, is that you'll go and get into this cycle of like over restriction. A lot of times, this is pretty common, not always, but over restriction. So you're not eating enough. You end up binging because you're so hungry. You feel really guilty about the amount of food that you binged on, and then you try and cut back your calories again, and then the cycle continues, right? It's something that's very, very common.
But I wish it was that simple. Now, as a former fat kid who's been through a pretty decent transformation and still has the appetite of a fat kid inside him, I'm gonna go over 6 of the internet's best tips to help deal with binge eating. But first, here's a short story. I remember growing up like a pretty normal average kid with an average build and normal eating habits up until like the 5th grade. And during that time, school became hard for me. My parents were going through a divorce, and then just a lot of familial things were happening. I felt like food was just such a comfort. And I can notice it now that I started eating a whole lot more during this time period than I ever did my entire life. The only thing that was stopping me from being a fat kid to being a morbidly obese kid was the fact that I wasn't lazy. It's just that I was addicted to food. And I mean, you could tell like anyone who knew me back then, I was the kid in lunch who was prowling for food. Also, it's just the way I grew up. My mom always taught me never to waste food and to always just eat and enjoy everything. So I just did. And although I wasn't technically diagnosed with binge eating disorder, the description of binge eating disorder and what I experienced as a kid, pretty similar and pretty accurate. But yeah, that's my story of my eating habits.
So it's interesting hearing him kind of tell his story there, because for me, I was like always big, but that's actually not true, because actually recently, it was my birthday recently, so I like posted a bunch of old pictures on my Instagram, and I was looking through them, and I realized, this sounds weird because it's not like I didn't know this, but I realized there was definitely a time when I started gaining weight like significantly faster, and it was probably when I was around 5 or 6. I've talked about this before. I had a hernia that was like right in my groin, and so I had to get that removed, and I remember I kind of started gaining weight from that. And I've always kind of like attributed it to maybe my mom used to think, oh, maybe it's like drugs that they gave you or something, right? I don't know if that's true, but maybe I became more sedentary. But as I've mentioned before on the channel too, my home life growing up wasn't the best. It was a rough childhood, and I don't know it. Like obviously, that stuff played a role in it, but for me it was so early, like I was so young, that it's hard for me to really pinpoint that. But it was just when I heard him kind of telling that story, it just kind of brought back some memories for me as well.
Anyways, the first tip they have here is to stop restricting yourself. They're saying that diets that involve extreme restrictions on food intake rarely work and typically lead to cravings that cause you to overeat. This tip I can kind of get behind. I do believe you shouldn't have food restrictions when it comes to the actual type of foods. The only problem with this is that you have to find the balance. For example, buy yourself a donut and allow yourself to eat them. That's good, that's great. However, say you keep that dozen of donuts in your house, you're gonna probably have one, right? But the thing is with binge eating, it's like you really don't have that much control over it, so then you just kind of take it all down. Allowing yourself food choices is good, but restricting portion size is what matters.
Yeah, this one's, I agree basically with everything that he said. That tip is, I understand why someone would say that or why people would, you know, give that advice, but it's so much easier said than done. Like, over restricting obviously leads, like I talked about, right? It's that cycle, but it's so much harder to do that, right? Like if you're someone, especially if you're like, because I come from the angle of I was someone that was morbidly obese, right? Massively overweight. I had a lot of weight to lose. And so for me, food was this thing that I clearly did not have control over, and I needed to find some control and find some boundaries and like stick to those boundaries. And so I think a lot of times when people hear like stop restricting, it's like you're not allowed to have any types of boundaries on food, right? Any types of boundaries is bad. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think having certain boundaries on certain foods, it just makes sense. I don't think that that is a bad thing. But it's going to be, and this is any tip when it comes to binge eating, it's going to be very personal for the individual, right? So for one person, maybe eating the donut might be a good thing, but for another person, it might just lead to them, like they can't stop, right? It's just impossible. And so it really depends. But I would say for the most part, I agree with that. Like over restricting to where you're only allowing yourself to eat like salad, only that's it, right? That usually is a sign like that just leads to things for a lot of people that aren't very great.
The second tip is to don't skip meals, which I'm gonna be honest with you guys, I don't agree with this tip. I noticed that when I was a kid, having breakfast, lunch, and dinner didn't matter to me because I was going to binge eat during any one of those periods. And having a breakfast, lunch, and dinner actually just added more fuel to the fire. I actually found better results through intermittent fasting or just having one big ass meal at the end of the day. So the third...
That's an interesting one because I would say that I don't agree completely with what he said. And again, no shade to him or anything like that, but I think that for a lot of people, the reason that they, you know, maybe say don't skip meals, which maybe I don't agree with, like don't skip meals, because I feel like the amount of meals you need in a day is going to be different for the person and how much they want to eat. Like, I don't think everyone has to eat breakfast, lunch, dinner and have some snacks in between, or everyone has to have 5 meals or whatever. But I think like intentionally trying to not eat because you want to save calories for a certain meal can be the start of a binge cycle for people. And so that's why I'm usually not the biggest fan. Like, I'm not going to say like you have to eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You have to eat 5 meals a day. But if you notice yourself intentionally restricting just because you want to have a bigger meal, a lot of times that can lead to not great things. And that's not for everybody. So again, this is all going to be relative. Like, that's why it's hard to talk about this kind of stuff, because whenever I do make a video about this, people will say, well, I disagree because this worked for me, that worked for me. And that's completely fine, right? Everyone that's struggling with binge eating, I do believe, struggles for a different reason. So that's why I do think it's very, very important, if it is something that you do want to work on, is you understand what triggers the binge eating for you. Because the most important thing for you is to figure out what is triggering it, and then how do you prevent that thing, right? I think that's the most important thing. And so all of these tips, like maybe only 2 of them are applicable to you, because that's the only things you struggle with, right? And so it's all kind of relative at the end of the day.
Third step, staying hydrated has many health benefits, but can also help curb cravings and reduce overeating.
Nice.
There's some science behind all of this, and it just makes more sense, you know? You can't eat as much if you're filling yourself up with some water. Drinking more water never hurt anybody, so always stay hydrated. This is a very good and highly recommended tip.
This is one of those, the drink more water thing, I'm like, yeah, but it just feels like such a cop-out. Like I feel like this maybe it's just me, but like I feel like they just put that in there because they're like, we need 6 tips instead of 5. Because like, drink more water. Okay, I guess that's good advice for most people for most things. So I mean, I can't say it's wrong, but okay.
Tip number 4 is to increase your fiber intake. Eating whole grains, fruits, vegetables, and unprocessed foods can help you feel satiated compared to eating refined grains, sugars, and processed foods. I really like this tip. I do think it should also be increase your fiber/protein intake, just because both fiber and protein is more satiating. The only issue I have with the fiber intake is that depending on the food, the calories could very much vary. So fruits and vegetables are pretty low in calorie, but then you have nuts, seeds, and oatmeals, which are great, but they're extremely high in calorie. And the main issue with binge eating is that it can lead to obesity. So probably stay away from like the higher calorie foods, but stick to fibers and stick to proteins.
Yeah, I mean, I would say pretty much everything he said there was spot on. Like, sounded like something I would say in a video. So, yeah, solid tip there.
The 5th tip they recommend is to exercise and relax. I highly recommend this tip. Exercising is just good for your overall health and well-being. Plus, exercise should be an essential for anyone who's planning on living, so highly recommend it. And then relaxing, I think finding hobbies that make you happy and that you can enjoy without feeling so stressed all the time. Because your mental state of being is what's causing you to binge. One of the best steps to follow, not just for binge eating, but for life. And the 6th.
So with that one, I agree with everything he said, but just to add more to it, I think that find exercise that you enjoy and that works for you. I think a lot of people will underestimate how powerful just going on a walk is, right? And a lot of people will think, oh, that's not hard enough for me. I need to do more, right? So they think they have to run. And, you know, a lot of the people that watch my videos or just in general that might be pretty overweight, running for you might be really, really difficult. And so you might run and then just feel like completely beat, or your body just hurts or whatever, right? So instead, if you were to just walk for 30 minutes or 45 minutes, right, instead of trying to go on that run, you'll be able to do that again the next day and the next day and the next day. It's all about finding things that work for you that you can stick to for a long period of time. That's the most important thing. So if you eventually do want to run, I'm not going to say don't run. I like to run. I just ran this morning, right? But it's okay to get to a point where you can run, right? I'm not saying you can't run. If you want to run, by all means, do whatever you want. Like, it's your life. But if you want to get to that point, I do think there are steps that you can take to get to the point where you're running. But again, exercise, any type of exercise. That could be doing CrossFit, that could be doing bodybuilding, that could be going on skiing adventures, playing tennis, whatever, right? As long as you're moving your body, that's the most important thing.
And final tip that the internet recommends is to practice intuitive eating. This just means when to eat when you're hungry and to stop eating when you're full. And yeah, that was all 6 of the tips.
I like he doesn't really go over the intuitive eating thing very much. I don't really know why. I think intuitive eating, again, it's one of those things that sounds really good. So if you're not familiar, intuitive eating is basically, you know, it's pretty much the first tip, like don't restrict yourself, right? And so eat whatever you feel like eating. And again, I agree with that, but I don't love the term intuitive eating because it's become very like divisive and people have used it to mean things that I just don't really agree with. So that's why I like to use the term mindful eating. So like I always talk about mindful eating for me is all the tools that I learned through the years and years of tracking that I did, tracking my macros. I still employ those with the types of foods that I eat now, but I don't track anything, right? I'm not weighing anything out. So that's why I call it mindful eating, because those things that I learned, I'll never forget. So I'll never be able to just not think of them when I'm preparing my food or when I'm going out to eat or whatever, right? So I'm mindful about the food that I'm eating, but I also don't go to a party and say, no, I can't have any of that cake or brownie or Thanksgiving's coming up. I can't have any of the pie. Absolutely not. No. I'll allow myself to have it, but I'll be mindful about what I decide to eat.
The internet recommends. Now for the 3 tips that I personally recommend to you guys. The first tip is to just simply change your environment. It might sound dumb and stupid, but ultimately, binge eating is a mental disorder that has physical limitations. So if you're not surrounded by food, you're not gonna binge eat. That's why I like to go outside. I like to go for walks. I like to study at cafes. I like to be in school. I like to just be elsewhere because I know if I stay in my house all day, I'll be too comfortable. When I get too comfortable, I can just go into the kitchen. And when I can just go into the kitchen, that can lead to me eating a snack or two, which can then lead to binge eating. Now let's say my first line of attack doesn't work and I'm stuck at home. My second tip is to just drink. Honestly, diet sodas, sparkling water, stuff like that really helps to curb cravings. Yeah, just really fill yourself up on this.
Yeah, I mean, y'all know how I am. I'm never going to shade anyone for drinking a diet soda. If that's something that you want to do, by all means, go ahead and do it. I am not going to shame you for doing it. I think diet sodas are great. They help me. I drink them very frequently. If you're someone that has lived with me or knows me closely, you'll know that I'm not lying there.
If you ever feel hungry, there's little to no calories in these drinks, and the carbonation helps you feel more full. So I like to consume a lot of this before I get into my last resort. And this is my third tip. Swap out your foods. This is more of a last resort type of thing. When worst comes to worst and you feel the need to eat, you're gonna eventually eat. It's better to have food like this that
Damn, that's a fat chicken breast, my boy.
can satiate you, like this, which is just overall more nutritious and lower in
Shout out
calories.
fruit.
If worst comes to worst, just make sure you have good food around your house and you're not gonna feel as guilty, you know what I mean? Because there's no way a cup of frozen fruits is worse than a cup of chocolates and candy. But yeah, those are my 3 personal contingencies / tips on how to deal with binge eating. If I were you, I would personally try and deal with binge eating first on your own. But if you really need help and you really can't control how your eating habits work, then go to a specialist, see someone, see a doctor, see a trained professionalist, and get real help. Make sure to like, subscribe, never stay satisfied. See you guys soon. Peace.
Yeah, so I thought it was a great video, so make sure you go check them out. There will be a link in the description. I thought that it was an interesting video, right? So when it comes to this stuff, obviously I'm not a I'm not a doctor. I know, it's crazy. But I think that one of the most important things whenever anyone talks about binge eating, I think it's important to just bring up the fact that it is so personal to the person. And so why someone does a certain thing is going to be different for everybody. And I really do think that, like, these lists and stuff can be helpful, but it's okay if maybe all of these aren't applicable to you, right? Maybe it's only one thing or 2 things or half of them, right? That's okay, because everyone's going to be different and everyone's triggers and the reason that they do these things are going to be different. But at the end of the day, if you are struggling with this, hopefully this video and, even the video that I'm recording right now helps you realize that you're not alone. I think that's one of the most frustrating and scary parts about struggling with binge eating is you feel alone. You feel like no one else struggles with this. I can say with certainty there are other people that struggle with this. And it's something that is a lot more common than I think a lot of people really think. But yeah, I just wanted to share my opinion and my thoughts on that video. If you did enjoy it, make sure you check it out down in the description. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Peace.